You already know something is wrong. You feel it before you can name it. The conversation ends, and you walk away smaller than when it started. A person smiles at you, and somehow you feel worse. You try to explain yourself and end up apologizing for things you didn't do. That feeling, that quiet shrinking, that's not you being sensitive. That's someone pulling strings you didn't know you had. Control doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with a warning. It doesn't show up wearing a mask. It shows up wearing a smile. It shows up as a favor, a text message, a sigh across the room. And before you realize what's happening, you've rearranged your entire life around someone else's mood. This is about waking up, not with anger, not with chaos, but with clarity so sharp it cuts right through the noise. Most people never see it coming, not because they're foolish, not because they're weak, but because they were taught that love means bending, that loyalty means enduring, that keeping the peace is more important than keeping yourself. So they bend, and somewhere in all that bending, they forget what it felt like to stand straight. You deserve to stand straight again. The first tactic is so common at lives inside families, friendships, and relationships that look perfectly normal from the outside. It's guilt, not the guilt that comes from genuine wrongdoing, but manufactured guilt, engineered debt, the kind that gets built slowly, favor by favor, sacrifice by sacrifice, until the person using it can say 4 words and bring you to your knees. After everything I've done. That sentence isn't love. It's a ledger. Real love doesn't collect receipts. Real love doesn't invest kindness waiting for repayment. The moment someone's generosity comes with invisible interest, it was never generosity at all. It was leverage wearing a gentle face. And here's what makes it so hard to see. You genuinely feel grateful. You genuinely care. So when they remind you of what they've given, something inside you shifts. You start to feel like you owe them your silence, your obedience, your agreement. You start to shrink your needs because their needs have been held over your head like a debt you can never fully repay. That is not a relationship. That is ownership disguised as devotion. The second tactic is silence. Not the kind of silence that comes from peace, not the kind that comes from thought, but silence as a weapon. Calculated, cold, deliberate. The silent treatment is one of the oldest forms of emotional control ever used. It says without a single word, you will come back to me on my terms, or you will feel the pain of my absence. And so you chase. You text, you apologize even when you don't know what you did wrong. You beg for reconnection because the distance feels unbearable. That's the design. They want the distance to hurt, because the moment you stop fearing someone's silence, the game ends. The moment you learn to sit inside your own stillness without panic, their power dissolves. The third tactic hides behind something that looks like kindness, compliments, but not the kind that builds you up, the kind that lift you slightly and then drop you. Wow, you actually looked good today. You were surprisingly sharp in that meeting. They almost had it right. You'd never expect that from someone like you. These words aren't accidental. They're crafted, designed to keep you uncertain, designed to make you feel like you almost belong, but not quite. You smile, but something stings. You say thank you, but you feel smaller. That's exactly the reaction they were engineering. Uncertainty makes people easier to control. Someone who is confident doesn't seek reassurance. Someone who is constantly kept slightly off balance always comes back looking for approval. Stop looking for approval from people who profit off your doubt. The fourth tactic is so deeply embedded in certain personalities that it takes years to recognize. The martyr, the person who always seems to be suffering more than you. Every time you bring up your pain, they redirect to theirs. Every time you need something, they collapse into their own crisis. It sounds like empathy. It looks like vulnerability. But what it actually does is exhaust you. It trains you to never bring your needs to them because doing so always makes you feel selfish. So you carry your weight quietly. You manage your struggles alone. And they remain the center of every emotional conversation you ever have. That's not connection. That's consumption. The fifth tactic is one of the most psychologically damaging things one person can do to another. They call it gaslighting. You call it confusion. You call it feeling crazy. You call it lying awake at night wondering if you remembered wrong. You didn't imagine it. You didn't overreact. You didn't misunderstand. But someone worked very hard to make you believe you did. They changed the story. Subtly, gradually. One denial here, one correction there. You're being too sensitive. That's not what happened. You always do this, until the version of events inside your head became something you no longer trusted. Until you started bringing every feeling to them for verification before you allowed yourself to feel it. That is not love. That is mental architecture. Someone has been rebuilding your reality from the inside, brick by brick, until you couldn't find the door out. The door has always been your own perception. Trust it again. The sixth tactic looks like enthusiasm. It looks like engagement. Someone who interrupts constantly, who finishes your sentences, who talks over you without pause. It feels social. It feels like excitement, but underneath it runs a quiet message. My voice belongs in this space more than yours. My thoughts arrive faster and matter more. And over time, you stop talking as much. You edit yourself before you speak. You shrink your contributions. You begin to believe that maybe your thoughts just aren't that interesting. They were. They still are. Someone performing dominance dressed it up as conversation. The seventh tactic is perhaps the one people walk away from most confused by, because it begins with what feels like magic. They adore you completely. They flood you with attention, affection, time, intensity. You feel chosen, seen, elevated. You think this is finally it. Then, without warning, they pull away. The calls stop. The warmth disappears. You sit there trying to figure out what you did, how to get back to how it was, and you'll do almost anything to return to that feeling. That was the plan. They created the high. They removed it. Now you are chasing them. That cycle is not love. That is conditioning. Real love doesn't need to manufacture your attachment through withdrawal. Real love is steady. It doesn't perform and disappear. It stays. Here is what all of these tactics have in common. They work because you are someone who cares. You feel. You give. You try to understand. You extend grace. And none of that is weakness. That is the depth of your character. But depth can be exploited by people who would rather pull you down than rise themselves. The moment you start recognizing these patterns, everything shifts. Not overnight, but one conversation at a time, one moment of choosing yourself at a time. You stop apologizing for things that weren't your fault. You stop chasing people who manufacture distance. You stop shrinking in rooms where your presence is fully earned. You stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided how they want to see you. This is not about cutting everyone off. This is not about becoming cold. It's about becoming clear. Clear about what is real. Clear about what is kind versus what is calculated. Clear about the difference between someone who wants you to grow and someone who needs you to stay small so they can feel large. You are not a puppet. You were never meant to be. The strings only work when you don't see them. And right now, in this moment, you see them. Every guilt trip. Every manufactured silence, every compliment that stings, every crisis that appears the moment you try to have a need. You see it now. And what you see cannot be unseen. This is where everything changes. Not tomorrow. Not when the situation gets easier. Not when they change. Now. With this awareness. With this clarity. With the decision to stop dancing every time someone pulls a string and start walking in the direction you actually chose. Your peace is not something you negotiate with people who have made a strategy out of stealing it. Your voice is not something you earn back by being agreeable enough. Your life is not a performance for an audience that only applauds when you make yourself smaller. Stand up. Stand still. Stand in who you actually are. The control ends the moment the awareness becomes a decision, and you just made one.